What's up, YouTube?
So today we are looking at the brand new synth plugin called Vital by the creator of Helm, which is also a free plugin, also very, very good. I've featured it once or twice on my channel before, but I think the reason that makes this particular synth so special is I think it's not by any stretch of the imagination a free plugin. There is a free version with a couple of watered down features, but that being said is just the feature set alone is, in my opinion, it takes on some of the top synths like Serum, Pigments, Hive, and all sorts of stuff like that. Of course, it's up to you whether you want to choose which synth, but I think this is going to replace a fair amount of other synths in my daily workflow. I like the fact that it's kind of one synth that's got it all in it. So for patch creation and that kind of thing, it's definitely going to be sort of my go-to everyday synthesizer. It's lacking in certain departments, like up against something like Phase Plant, which is, you know, never-ending in terms of expandability. But that being said, is for all the other kind of fixed architecture synthesizers, I think they're going to be very hard-pressed to come up with updates to take on the Vital synthesizer. But that being said, is I'm not going to go through all the features and how it works in this video. There are two videos that I've actually recently watched that I definitely recommend you checking out if you do want to know all about the synths. One by Claritone Audio and one by Marula Music. I'm going to post links to those videos in the description. Those should give you more of a rundown of exactly how the synth works, all the different features in the synth. But for this video, what I want to discuss is my top 10 features that I think are going to be game changers for Vital Synthesizer. So in case you're wondering, the sound that I opened this video with, that robotic voice, I made that in Vital Synthesizer, but I believe that feature is going to be probably my #1 most used feature in the plugin. So I'm going to save that for the end of the list. So definitely stay tuned for that. And I'm going to try to put chapters in the bottom so you can skip to wherever you want in the video. So I'm just going to add a blank instance of Vital into this project that I'm working with, and we can start to discuss some of what I think are the most game-changing features in this plugin. So there are probably going to be other plugins that have one or two of these features, but like I said in the beginning, having all of these inside a single plugin is just going to make for, you know, everyday workflow so much easier. I can make patches and don't have to think, you know, what type of sound do I want to make before loading what plugin. I think this pretty much has everything. So yeah, let's discuss some of those features. So game-changing feature number 10 is pitch quantizing of the oscillators. And each of the oscillators has the ability to be quantized to a different pitch. So this is particularly interesting. So say, for example, you can have one oscillator which is only being, for example, transposed to a single note in the octave, while another one is doing running notes to create like an arpeggiator. So you can create these kind of like these arps that have a lower bass note that corresponds to the octave and things like this. So quickly what I'm going to do is let's just put on, so how it works is with the quantizing, if you don't know what quantizing is it only allows certain amount of modulation through that corresponds to pitches in a scale. And you can choose the scale by, say, for example, just punching in the notes in a, I believe this is a C minor. But, you know, to be honest with you, I don't like using all of the scales. I'll generally choose like 2 or 3 of them, maybe 4. So let's say, for example, choose something like this, and then we can dive into the first oscillator and just select a octave. So it's just a C, which is being quantized, and here we have a C minor chord. So here what we can do is we can set a LFO to modulate both of these pitches like this, and let's listen to the result. So we're probably going to want to turn the frequency of this LFO down a little bit, but I'm going to just unsnap it just to make things a little bit easier for us. So that's really nice for creating these kind of like ARP type paddy type things. Let's actually just apply some effects here. So let's set this so that oscillator 1 and 2 are both going through this filter. And now we can use another LFO to modulate this filter over here. So just on a side note, I'm going to dive a little bit more into this a little bit later on, but here we've got further filters which we can use. So these are basically spectral warp modes, or I think spectral morph modes. Forgive me if I'm getting the terminology wrong, but these are essentially similar to Serum's warp modes. These particular ones are designed to basically high pass a sound and low pass a sound. So this is interesting if you're doing these kind of like layered sounds with these kind of like modulation systems that are doing these ARPs and stuff, is you can filter the sound before feeding it to the filter. And this is kind of on a spectral level, so it's editing the waveform instead of just filtering it. So it's additive as opposed to subtractive, if that makes sense. So here we can apply further modulation to these. So this brings me to feature number 9, is that the modulations are expandable, and you've got up to 6 envelopes and 8 LFOs. So it might look pretty simple when you first look at the synth, but as you kind of add more and more of these modulations, you'll see more open up over here. So, you know, it's pretty expansive what you can do with this. Let me quickly, I'm not going to use these envelopes, but let me quickly just assign these to things just so you can see how it kind of expands as you assign them, and then as you sort of unassign them, it simplifies the GUI a little bit, which is super cool. It makes things very simple and very easy to use. Expandable modulations, 6 envelopes, 8 LFOs. That's, I think, more than enough for most sound design tasks that you would need. So yeah, let's jump into editing this low pass a little bit over here. Cool, that sounds fantastic. So we're in the mod matrix menu, and this brings us to point number 8, is the advanced modulation capabilities, both in terms of remapping and this curve control and stereo capabilities of the modulations. So I'm going to discuss the stereos a little bit later on, but for this particular point, I want to bring up this mod remap. So what this does is it's basically kind of like a function generator. It allows you to remap the values of the modulation, of how it's sending to particular things. I'll use the modulation that's going into the filter. I think that'll be most audible. So here we can look at modulation lane 3. So we can pop that up, and here, if you look at the bottom over here, you've got this mod remap. And what this allows you to do is basically remap the values, like I said. So now, instead of just being a linear curve of, 1 to 100% or 0 to 100%, it's going to step these values depending on this kind of like shape that you draw in. This is so cool for ambient textures and generative kind of stuff, because it allows you to take something that's already, a full patch, and without understanding too much, you kind of just play with these mod remaps and you completely change how the sound is moving. It's cool for creating, you can actually quantize modulation using the system. You can do all sorts of cool things by just remapping how the modulations are working. So this is incredibly cool. And being able to edit it is actually the same as the LFO editor. So I'll get a little bit more about how that workflow works a little bit later on in the video. But it just makes things easier, for creating these steps or ramps or all sorts of stuff like this. Just make things super easy for creating crazy modulation capabilities. Okay, so mind-blowing feature number 7 is the advanced randomization that we have built into Vital. So apart from like the regular kind of like sample and hold type of randomization that we see in a lot of synths and stuff, we've got a variety of different styles of random. Each obviously have different randomization parameters. I think this one is particularly interesting because I haven't seen a Lorenz attractor in a plugin before, unless maybe I've missed something. You guys let me know in the comments. This is a pretty interesting thing because it deals with chaos theory. I'm not a mathematician, so I don't fully understand it, but it kind of like utilizes a bunch of real world aspects to create this kind of like chaotic pattern. I think a lot of fractals and stuff use this type of theory to create their types of patterns and stuff. Again, I'm not a mathematician, so I don't fully understand it, but yeah, it's basically a very interesting type of randomization which attempts to not spit out too many of the same values too often, if for lack of a better explanation. So let's have a look at how this works. So what we can do is we can use this to modulate the pitch of our sound, and then we could quantize it to a scale. And this also has a stereo mode, which is super interesting for creating these kind of like moving pads and textures. I kind of want to slow this down a little bit, so let's maybe go with a 1/2. I enabled that stereo and put on some effects. Maybe let's give this some unison to fatten the sound up a little bit. Amazing. And feature number 6 is the incredible wavetable editor. So I want to show you some really, really cool things about this. So first of all, it's incredibly intuitive. You basically just hit this pencil over here. This opens your wavetable editor. Much like most of the other kind of grid-based editors within Vital, you've got a sort of definitive X and Y control over your grids. And this allows you to kind of, fine tune and get these kind of like really specific shapes. You can connect the dots to get these shapes and stuff. Anyway, so that's like drawing of your waveforms in terms of this kind of like wavetable drawing or editing mode. Say, for example, we want to add another frame, so we can morph between several kind of like shapes in our wavetable. It works quite similar to kind of like a video editor. You have keyframes over here. So if we go create keyframe, we can move this over here. If we jump to the first one and to the second one, you'll notice that we can edit these sort of individually. So let me actually just go grids back down to a smaller number, and we can just draw in a kind of regular saw wave again, or slightly more regular saw wave. And you see now when we jump between these two keyframes, it jumps between those two shapes. And here we've got several different types of blend modes. So either waveform blend, which would then kind of like, I guess more like a crossfade type of thing, a spectral blend, and then various other ones. I'm not going to get too in depth with that. But I think what the very kind of special thing about this mode is you've got these modifiers. So this allows you to create like effects and, furthermore create keyframes in these effects. And say, for example, we can create a wavefold and go from like 1 and then to like something like 32. And then when we sweep, it actually folds the waveform like that. And you can then expand this. You're not limited to just a wave folder. There's various other effects and stuff you can use. You can create multiple keyframes and stuff. So it's pretty advanced and pretty intuitive how you can kind of edit these. So let's just go frequency filter. Let's maybe go with a band pass. And we can, let's do something like that up to here. And then let's go shape out a bit so that it kind of like reduces the amount of band pass effect. So we can go like halfway. Yeah, let's see how this sounds. Let me turn the pitch down a little bit here so we can get kind of more granular type of sound going on. So that's insane for just creating random wavetables out of initialized saw waveforms. You can create these really advanced like stacks of effects that kind of like warp, and it writes it into the kind of wavetable. It's not like your warp modes, which you can further add onto the signal, which is pretty insane. Okay, number 5 is the I'm going back to the stereo parameter, and I want to talk a little bit more about how this works. So let's say, for example, we've got this wavetable which we've just created. I'm just going to put this frame somewhere around the middle here. Let's take an LFO and let's modulate our frames of our wavetable, and let's see what's happening here. So what the stereo does is it kind of offsets the stereo balance between these modulations. So the easiest way to kind of like imagine this is, say, for example, you've got 2 copies of oscillator 1. It's applying a offset amount of modulation to each one and panning them left and right. Does that make sense? So check this out. So that's a pretty insane sound for, just straight out the wavetable editor, a little bit of LFO modulation, and we could take it so much further from here, again, with this 2 different types of warp modes, with filters, with all sorts of stuff like that. Here, let's look at one of these warp modes. Let's look at vocode. So we could get another LFO to modulate this parameter over here, and we could give it some stereo. So let's apply some effects to this. I think what might be a good idea is to pop in a filter first. We can go with something like a 24 dB. Let's remove some of the resonance, and we can flip it to a high pass and turn it quite low. Just so we're removing some of the low end before some of these effects. And then we can just apply some random effects, see how this goes. Let's go with some delay. Let's go with the dotted as usual, ping pong. Okay, so let's look at this filter. Let's do a high. And let's do another stereo on this. I think that could be really interesting. Get a lot of stereo motion happening. So I want to look at the LFO editor. So one thing that makes this really cool is, again, you've got this kind of X and Y grid that you can snap to that makes things a little bit easier. Let's say, for example, if you're wanting to make a melody, you don't particularly have to quantize the system. I've showed you how this works in Phase Plant. You can just go 16 over here, let's say, for example, and then 12 over here. And then 12 would correspond like chromatically to the keys, if that makes sense. And then if we hold, let's say, for example, put in a step, Control will snap to these kind of like steps, if that makes sense. So if you just kind of know what your scales are, how many semitones in between each note in the scale, you can quickly snap a LFO shape to the scale. You can do this in Serum or Phase Plant, etc., etc. But having the ability to quantize your oscillator just makes things a little bit easier for doing this type of thing, because you can just punch in the notes that you want. So then let's go here. Let's set this to, I believe 4/1 would be the correct speed, but we can double check that now. Set this to modulate the pitch. Okay, so I'm going to quickly put some effects on here again, just to make things a little bit easier, or just so they don't sound so like an initialized patch. Okay, let's play with some of these modes here. Let's maybe put a random. Let's do sample and hold on this phase dispersion mode. Put this on a 1/16. Okay, that smear mode sounds nice. Let's go with that. Okay, so anyway, I'm getting carried away. Let's jump over to LFO 2 and I'll show you another really cool thing about this LFO editor that just makes workflow super intuitive. Let's turn level down on oscillator 1. Let's drag this over here and let's say go with 32 steps. Let's set this to, I think it would be 4/1. We can always change this just now. And if you hold control, notice that we've set this to ramp down mode. If we hold control, it draws in a bunch of steps like this, which just makes like this type of gated pattern, if you're drawing this type of thing, super easy. So in Serum, this type of thing takes ages to draw out these long patterns and stuff, but super, super intuitive. As you can see, it took me a second. Okay, let's set this to 2/1, I believe would be the closest. So then let's go in and draw in some steps on every so often of these and see, you know, create like a groove in this gated pattern. Or we could just reduce some of them so that, you know, it's not playing on like every single one, if that makes sense. Create like a groove with some notes missing. See how this works. So we could now go in and, you know, draw in different shapes here on LFO 1 to create different melodies. And because we've kind of like quantized it, they're always going to kind of be in scale. So let's just see here. Okay, we want this to be 16 grids. And let's set this to step mode. So simple, so effective. Okay, so feature number 3 that I think is insane in Vital is the key tracking of the LFOs. And this is insane for various reasons, because this allows us to use an LFO to frequency modulate an oscillator. This is actually a trick that I've seen, I believe Mute Productions did a video on this, creating an FM sound, but with the LFO shapes, but you've got to actually punch in the frequencies and stuff like that. And it gets a little bit complicated because you can't key track the patch. This is pretty mind-blowing because this allows you to create that same type of FM sound, but you can key track the LFO. So all you need to do is click on this little icon over here and click key track. Now you can actually set the pitch of the LFO depending on your sort of keyboard input. So let's say, for example, use LFO 1 to modulate the pitch of oscillator 1. Let's go with a plus 48 first up. Let's just jump to the matrix to make it a little bit easier to punch in over here. We can right click, enter value and say 48. And let's jump back over here and see what's happening. So you can create these FM sounds with just a single oscillator and an LFO, and it tracks to the key of your input. So the idea here is to kind of go wild, draw in like shapes. You've got various shapes that you can choose from here. Let's punch in a gated pattern. What I can actually do here, let's remove this melody that we've made, and we can actually just put in a MIDI insert. Let's go with a step designer. And here's a little trick. What we can do is just reduce the amount of steps to 1, put in 1 note. This is a sharp that we're working in this track. Let's maybe go an octave down. And then we can put in a density to reduce the amount of percentage of probability that it's actually going to play a note. So I'm just going to quickly put a filter over here, and we can create a band pass, and let's just do like a random on the band pass. We can create like a foresty type of sound here. Let's actually combine the two randoms. The Perlin is nice because it's a kind of a rounded random, but sample and hold is nice because it's a squared random. So we can set this to 1/16, also set this to modulate the cutoff frequency. That's awesome. So yeah, creating FM with no FM, and it Keytracks the LFO, which is super cool. So this is also particularly cool for creating filter audio rate modulation, which is a particularly awesome sound. I like using it a lot. It creates a nice squelchy type of vibe. So let's just initialize this preset. What we can do here is, yeah, let's just keep it at a saw wave. Let's initialize or enable one of the filters, and we can set a LFO to modulate the filter. So here again, let's go Keytrack on that guy, and then we're probably going to want to change the amount and tweak with this a little bit. But what I actually want to do here is let's load up a MIDI file that I've got over here, remove some of these MIDI inserts that I put on this channel. I actually want to give this some legato. I want to make it one voice and then turn up the glide. So you can very quickly change the kind of texture of the filter by changing this shape over here, which is really, really cool. I like to stick with actual octave tunings of the frequency when doing this kind of audio rate modulation of the filter. I find it sounds kind of cleanest when you do it that way. Okay, another mind-blowing feature. Okay, so feature number 2 on my list is the fact that you've got 2 independent warp modes. One for doing the more kind of modulation type stuff, AM, FM, RNM, that kind of thing, and then one for actually warping how the actual spectral content of your waveform. So this is probably most easily represented using not a basic shapes saw wave. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to look through a couple of these built-in wavetables and find something that I think is going to be okay. That's probably going to work for this example, and let's just cycle. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so and then let's go create another oscillator over here, and let's say for example with this one let's use a basic shapes. Okay, so we've got a sine wave and a granular upgrade wave. So here let's say FM from oscillator 1, the sine wave. Let's pitch it down a little bit, the actual carrier. So with most other plugins, we'd be limited to this. We could kind of change the actual wavetable position, or we could edit the actual wavetable itself to generate something new. But the fact that we've got these other warp modes, like let's say for example, on this actual sine wave, we can change the shape of it. We can change the shape of this granular upgrade with various different interesting textures. let's get a bit interesting here. What we can do is we can quantize this carrier to only be on the octave, and then we can set a random to modulate the pitch. And now it's only going to hit those kind of octaves, so it will kind of always be relevant with a FM sound. Then we can use this other random over here to modulate this other warp mode. And then let's set this to stereo as well. Very, very interesting stuff you can do. Oh, that's awesome. So my number one favorite feature in Vital is the text-to-speech wavetable generator. I know Serum has this, and there's various ways of doing this with other kind of applications and stuff, but just the ability to kind of generate it directly as a wavetable, it sounds super clean, so I think it sounds much better than Serum's one. And you've got various different languages and accents to choose from, which I think is particularly special. We could go with like Australia, UK, all sorts of stuff like that, which is pretty insane. So anyway, let's just go with a random word here. Let's just choose glitch, and it generates us a wavetable. So if we use a LFO to modulate the wavetable position, let's just use a ramp so we can move this node over like this.
Glitch, 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 glitch.
So you can do various interesting things with this. You know, you could like put a melody going through here to create a kind of like spongly type vibe. Let's just set this so that it doesn't reset. We can actually move this top node here. I think it's got that like shh, which is not so cool. Yo, that is super cool. I love it. I love it. I'm going to use that text-to-speech a lot. I just love the ability to like warp and do all sorts of stuff just with that text and, you know, the different accents and stuff. I think that's super intuitive, super unique. I haven't seen that in a plugin ever. Awesome. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm going to be posting a link to where you can grab this plugin and check out more information on it. Like I said, there's a free version, but I'm not sure exactly all the details on that. I know there's a paid version with, you know, different perks and all sorts of stuff. I believe the text-to-speech generator is only in the paid versions, so that's why I definitely recommend going for that. Anyway, I'm going to be uploading these presets to my Patreon for all my $5 supporters, so if you want to know what that's all about, check out the link that's in the description. See you guys next time. Cheers.